Hello everyone, I hope you're doing brilliantly. I wanted to share with you today a couple of notes about Romanticism, which is the literary movement that began in the late 1700s and it lasted right through until about halfway through the 19th century. If you don't know this already, the 19th century is kind of synonymous with the Victorian era, Queen Victoria was on the throne from 1837 until 1901, so obviously a really long time. And in that time, a lot of great works of literature were created. So if you're doing GCSE, this is going to be relevant for you no matter which poetry cluster you're studying, whether it's Power and Conflict, Love and Relationships, or Worlds and Lives, which is the new one on the AQA syllabus, and I think that's really good that they've added that in. I do think that was much needed. It's important to remember with Romanticism, actually, that it is Romanticism with a capital R. If it's written with a little r, it becomes, not the movement, but just the word. When you're writing about Romanticism, always make sure you capitalise it because it is a proper noun. Anyway, let's move on to talking about some of the more juicy Romanticism details. So, Romanticism starting is usually attributed to these big boys here, the big six. Some of these poets are on the syllabus and some aren't. I'm pretty sure Coleridge is not on the syllabus, but Shelley definitely seems to be the popular one for the exam board. The reason it's done like this is because some of the poets are old enough to be the others' dads. Poets like William Blake and William Wordsworth, both of whom are on the syllabus, were revolutionary in the literary sphere because they completely changed how people approach poetry. Before this, everyone was obsessed with the Enlightenment, which was kind of all about science and reason and rationality. When the Romantic movement came about, this became a kind of old way of thinking, a little bit outdated, You can read as much as you like, do as many scientific studies as you like, but unless you put the books away, you're not experiencing life to its fullest. I'm pretty sure Wordsworth actually said something like that at some point, because the Romantic poets were all about experiencing life to its fullest. They wanted to make sure that they felt all of the emotions that they could and experience as much nature as they could. So this table here, it shows all of the poems in the clusters by the big six. If you go on to do literature at A level, you might end up doing a little bit of Keats, but it does depend on where you go for sixth form. But this isn't all of the Romantic poets you're studying, so let's have a look at all of them. For Power and Conflict, we have Ozymandias, The Prelude, London. For Love and Relationships, we have When We Two Parted, Porphyria's Lover, Sonnet 29, and Neutral Tones. For Worlds and Lives, we have Lines Written in Early Spring, England in 1819, Shall Earth No More Inspire Thee, and In a London Drawing Room. All of these are really good, by the way, so if you feel like exploring outside of your cluster, definitely try the other cluster's poems. Anyway, you probably know a little bit about what Romanticism is already, but I did kind of want to give you a bit more detail about it from some actual literary critics. This kind of thing is especially good if you're aiming for the higher levels or if you're thinking about doing it at A level, but it's also very useful if you just kind of want a more firm understanding of the movement. So firstly, we have Christopher Ricks, who says that the argument is that the period of Romanticism, 1760-1830, manifests an intensity of political consciousness, which is everywhere alive. And all he really means there is that there's a lot of politics in the poems, more than there was before. People are very conscious of the politics that are going on. So you can see this in poems such as London by William Blake. We also have Catherine Peck, who says, nature was a predominant romantic theme in the light of the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not going to read the rest of it, but what we've essentially got there is that nature was a massive component of Romantic poetry, and there is a reason for it too, because it was around this time that the Industrial Revolution was happening. The Industrial Revolution was, for some people good, for some people less good. Machinery was a big part of daily life, and trains were becoming a more popular mode of transport. They hadn't really been a thing before. Pollution was becoming a thing for like the first time ever. And you probably, if you study things like Christmas Carol, you might know a lot of this was associated with workhouses. So it probably is quite corrupt when you look back on it. People were also coming from far and wide, especially the countryside, to find work, and so overpopulation became a bit of a thing in the cities. And this is why the countryside and nature became so romanticised in poetry. It was like a place of escape, less polluted, less dangerous, all that kind of thing. I also think this quote from Baudelaire is particularly interesting because he equates Romanticism with modern art, and it is important to remember that this means modern of the 19th century. I know you won't think of Romantic poetry as modern because it is, you know, about 200 years ago, and that's fine, but at that time it absolutely was, and modern kind of has connotations of progressive, you know, it was a bit more experimental than they had previously been. Another part of Romanticism that I haven't mentioned yet is intensity of emotion. So this can range anywhere from love to anger to fear. I'm going to look at a couple of examples in a minute, but I do just want to draw your attention to the sublime. So when we think of the sublime, we probably just really think of, you know, really cool or really good, you know, if you're normal. I mean, me, I think of Ryan Gosling in the Barbie movie shouting sublime, but I think it's funny and I'm strange. But yeah, no, the sublime is actually an art or literary concept. It refers to the feeling of powerlessness, basically, when something, especially nature, causes extreme feeling. So Edmund Burke actually says that it's usually visual objects that cause a mode of terror or of pain, and that is basically what the sublime is. If you want to have a little bit of a further look at this, you can go to this link here. I'll put it in the description. But of course, that's just an offshoot of Romanticism. So coming back to Romanticism, I've laid out some of the key characteristics of the movement. We have the self, identity, childhood, nature, the sublime, of course, intense emotion, religious or political consciousness, and essentially that's it. There are probably more, but that's kind of the stuff that I think is the main components. So we can easily see where poems such as The Prelude and Porphyria's Lover would fit here. Extreme emotions and sense of self are massive themes there. This is all great and all, but you're probably thinking, you know, this is so much context. How on earth am I going to apply it? And, you know, you're right, it is very well knowing the stuff, but applying it is completely different. So let's have a look at an example. Although this one is of the prelude, it will be helpful if you're not studying power and conflict as well, because it will show you how we relate things back to Romanticism in general. We're looking here at a poem that is packed with characteristics of the Romantic movement. There is so much of it, so I'm choosing a couple of things to focus on. We've got emotions and we've got nature. These two feel the most prominent to me, but they might be different to you. Then we have to ask ourselves which quotes actually align with those themes. So let's have a look. We have about led by her, we've got the personification of nature. I unloosed her chain, meaning the boat. So we've got this kind of, it's almost like an affair's happening with nature, you know. We've got trouble pleasure, which in itself is an oxymoron, but it does suggest how the sublime is affecting him. And the same with small circles glittering idly in the moon. All of that kind of thing relates to nature's beauty. We've also got it on this slide. A little bit longer on this slide, but still worth looking at. If you want to pause and we'll reconvene, but I'm just going to move on. It is clear that William Wordsworth did have a little bit of a love affair with this lake, but he also had moments where it frightened him immensely in his childhood, and that is so clear here. I'm going to focus on the scary part, and this is how I'm going to write it. In William Wordsworth's The Prelude, we see quintessential characteristics of Romanticism as the narrator details their experience on the lake. Wordsworth describes the craggy ridge with personification as if with voluntary power instincts. This personification implies how powerful and alive the cliff appears in the dark, while in reality it is stationary and harmless. Specifically, the abstract noun instinct has connotations of primitiveness and animalistic tendencies, which causes the reader of the poem to feel a similar kind of fear to the emotions of the narrator. It is clear that this is an example of the sublime, a typical characteristic of Romantic poetry, as the narrator feels fear and powerlessness regarding their experience on the lake. So there we have it, context on the Romantic movement, what it means to be a Romantic poet, and how to apply it all to your essay. I hope you found this video useful. Let me know if you did, and if you have anything else you'd like to see, then please let me know. Thank you very much.